The competition's gonna hate this. Hey team, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brian, core design engineer with Brunswick Bowling, and as you guessed, today's a pretty cool day because we get to talk about all the new technology inside the Hater core that's inside, you guessed it, the Hater. But before we get to all that newness, I'm gonna do a little bit of housekeeping right here. First, I want to draw your attention to the Troublemaker video series. It details all the information about the dualistic core, the first and only core designed specifically with two-handed and no-thumb bowlers in mind. But the one I really want to draw your attention to, I'm going to link right here. This is the third video in the video series. This is the video for the layout system. It's a simple system that uses a modified version of dual angles to get you the most accurate and the easiest layouts for no-thumb bowlers. And I'm going to let you in on a secret. You don't have to have the dualistic core in the Troublemaker to make this system work. It works for all symmetrical balls across the board. The trends are all the same. And at the end, I detail a little bit of information about how to modify the drilling angle to swing the mass bias to make this work for asymmetrical balls too. So this system works for symmetrical balls, it works for asymmetrical balls, it basically works for any core, for any bowler that doesn't use a thumb. So if you're a proshop operator or you're a two-handed bowler or a no-thumb bowler of any kind, make sure you get familiar with that video. You'll be putting layouts on the balls in no time that are accurate and are easy. I also make playlists on my channel, so make sure you check out the DV8 bowling playlist where all the information on the newest DV8 cores are there. Now the fun part. I get to detail all the information about why the very unique shape of this core is what it is, but first I want to dive into the numbers. 2539RG is effectively a 254 that plays in a similar range as the original Hellraiser dot core. That's in the Hellcat and the Hellraiser series. And you'll notice again too that the 054 total differential, that's a ton of total differential, which means a ton of flare potential and a ton of hook potential. Again, similar to the Hellcat series and the original Hellraiser dot core. That was in the Hellraiser, Hellraiser Return, and of course both Hellcats. You may have guessed by now, but this Hater is going to be a replacement core for the Hellraiser series, playing in the same RG and differential range, with one key difference, and that's the 024 intermediate differential. That is a ton of intermediate differential. In fact, that is the most intermediate differential that any DV8 core has had to date. The closest we had was back with the Hitman series, and before that the Pitbull series at 020, and in the current lineup the Collision series has an 019. So this 024 is a full 5 points higher on intermediate diff than those balls, and what intermediate diff translates into is sharpness at the break point, but also a quicker hook window when you see the response to friction. So this is going to be a quick, sharp change of direction when the ball encounters friction. Now you'll notice that this core is very interesting as it revolves around here in the bottom corner. It is kind of boomerang shaped at the top and the bottom. I codenamed this boomerang in the design process, but there are very particular key features about this core that I want to point out. And we'll start with the front of the core that is very tall. To have a high total differential but also a high intermediate differential, the cores have to be tall and narrow by nature, but we've displaced some mass in some different areas. So you notice the front of this core actually is a very tall knob shape, but you'll also notice that this core isn't designed specifically for no-thumb bowlers like the Troublemaker is, but some of the attributes definitely carried over. So talking about thumb-in players for a second, to drive the differential down, all you have to do is put a pin-down layout on this ball. You can take the differential down from an 054 into the mid-40s with a pin-down layout. So if you aren't looking for a hook monster and you want a controlled motion that still gives you that strong mid-lane read, that's a way to do it with a pin-down layout. But if you're a no-thumb player, you don't have that luxury. What you can do instead is use low pin layouts. In other words, layouts that put the dot very close to the center of grip. Layouts in the area of 1.5 to 2.5 inches from the dot from the dot to the center of grip are going to get you through that top knob just like you would on the Troublemaker, and again that's going to reduce the differential just like a pin under layout or a pin down layout for thumb in players. That's going to get you into the mid 40s in differential. That's going to be a lot tighter flare spacing and a much more controllable reaction if you want it. Now of course pin up, this thing's going to be a monster. With a standard thumb in layout and with no thumb layouts, when you drill the fingers 3 inches deep on the no thumb layouts, you're going to get this ball into the high 50s in total differential and into the 30s in intermediate differential. So this thing is blowing up in terms of the numbers, and it's going to be as much flare potential and as much change of direction as you want for the top of your bag for the heaviest oil conditions. That's driven by the shape of the wings on this core too. Even if you kick the mass bias out, regardless if you're a thumb in or no thumb player, if you kick the mass bias out toward the VAL on your layout, then that means you're going to have a faster revving layout, but you don't lose any intermediate differential because of the shape of the wings on the body of this core. So the lowest you're going to go is about the undrilled value of 0.24. And like I said, if a thumb in player puts the thumb in the area of the mass bias, you'll get it into the 30s. If you're a no thumb player and you put the fingers in the area of the mass bias with a really tall pin layout, then you can also get the core into the mid 30s in intermediate differential. So this is effectively the max core values that you need for heavy oil long patterns or just overall hook if you're an incredibly speed dominant player. Of course, this core has dynamic core for harder hitting power, and it's wrapped in the HK22 Havoc Hybrid cover stock. This is the first time you've seen Havoc additive package with the HK22 base in the hybrid format, and it's really aggressively sanded. I believe it's 500, 1500 out of box, so this is your chalk. This is going to be your heavy oil, cutting through the middle of the pattern monster. It's not going to be the most angular back end motion, and it's certainly not going to be the most dynamic at the back of the lane, but it's going to slow down in the mid lane and chew through the oil incredibly well. The interesting thing about this core is that higher RG at 254 means that it's not necessarily revving at your toes or revving right off your hand. So even though this is an incredibly aggressively sanded cover and an incredibly aggressive strong cover combination with this core, which has strong numbers by nature anyway, it's not revving right away. So it gives you what I'd consider a late strong mid lane reaction as opposed to that really early diggy mid lane that some of those low RG cores are going to give you, especially an ultra low RG core like in the 247 range. So being in the high 250s, the mid 250s, 254 means that you're going to actually have some lope and you're going to have some late mid lane reaction as opposed to early mid lane reaction. Now, because of the high intermediate differential and the high flare potential of this core, it is going to want to start early, and when it sees friction, it's going to want to change directions quickly. It's going to have a hard torquing motion, a small hook window, not necessarily the most continuation. So you can easily blend this ball out with a lower pin layout or a pin under layout, long VAL angles, and more moderate flare spacing on the pin to PAP if you'd like, but that's not really what this one is built for. This one is built for abrupt mid lane traction, a quick change of direction, and more of a hook set motion, which is actually very useful and very usable if you get the ball to hook set into the pocket. That's exactly what you're looking for if you're playing in the belly of the pattern on the freshest heavy oil patterns, and it's going to give you teeth to chew through that oil before it even sees the mid lane friction. All that being said, I don't think I need to spend too much time on the when to use segment of this. This is going to be the top dog in your bag for every player across the board. If you're a high rev player, I think you're going to find surprising utility out of this one because of the fact that it's a higher RG. You could easily put a layout that's lower flaring on this ball, such as a low pin layout for a no thumb bowler or a pin under layout for a traditional bowler, and drop that diff out of the 50s into the high 40s or even the mid 40s, and give yourself a ball that's very strong with still a very abrupt change of direction in the mid lane that doesn't overflare or overhook on more medium conditions. That'll still be enough ball for the toughest, longest, and heaviest patterns. If you're a more matched player where your speed matches your rev rate, then I wouldn't be afraid to put a standard layout on this. You don't want to go with an aggressive layout. I think a standard benchmark layout on this piece will make it as aggressive as you possibly need it to be. It's going to give you a real good look on fresh sport patterns and again, fresh heavy oil patterns. And the hook set motion of this ball actually is going to help you blend wet-dry conditions fairly well. I think for a match player, you'll be surprised at the level of utility that this ball gives you on house shots, where you can be in left of your opponents or left of the rest of your league team whatever the case may be, and being able to send it at the friction. It's going to read the friction in the mid lane really hard, but lay off the back end a little bit to give you a surprisingly blendy yet smooth transition at the back of the lane. That's a level of predictability that you don't necessarily get with cleaner, shinier, or more symmetrical pieces. I think you'll be surprised at how good that shape looks on higher cliffed conditions, and again, good for long oil sport patterns. The more blended medium conditions, I think you could find utility out of other products in the DV8 lineup. And of course, if you're a speed dominant player or you're just a rev challenged player, you're always looking toward these big, chewy, aggressive, asymmetrical balls. And I think this one's actually a pretty great choice because it does have some surprising lope in the front of the lane if you find yourself enough head oil. So if you dig yourself far enough left that you're playing in where the tweeners typically start, where the more matched players typically start, this ball's going to glide with a level of ease that might surprise you. And that quick hook window, because of that high intermediate differential, is actually going to be beneficial at making sure that ball changes direction at the end of the pattern without being too slow or too gradual. Occasionally with these big sanded asymmetrical balls, they read really early for you and you find yourself moving into the middle of the pattern to find the head oil. But once you do that, they don't quite recover at the back of the lane. They have more of a gradual climbing motion, and that's not good either. So you kind of trap yourself into being either too early or too slow of a response to friction. This one with a high intermediate diff is going to give you a little more lope through the fronts with a high RG, and that intermediate diff is going to help it corner quick enough that despite the fact that you're playing more left than you typically can, you still have that change of direction. So ultimately a great utility piece for medium to medium high volumes for low rev players. That's all the information I have on this brand new hater, available very quickly coming up March 21st. Make sure you like and subscribe to my YouTube and Facebook page, Bowling Buckosh. I make new videos as we make new cores here at the Brands of Brunswick. Until next time, later haters.